Everybody wants something from you. Who do you pay attention to? Who gets the best of you? Welcome to another episode of High Ticket Woman. I'm Debbie Cottle, your host. And today we're going to be talking about how to prioritize relationships in your life for the sake of you and your marriage. I want you to think about this in terms of a pyramid. I talk about this a lot with people that I work with. And let's say there's, 5, 6 levels minimum on your pyramid. And you're going to put the most important relationship at the top and then all the way down from there, as many levels as you want. Who's the next most important person in your life? And then the next and the next. And and then take a look at what you got. Okay. And what's interesting about this is that a lot of times when I have women do this, they're nowhere on their own pyramid. They've completely left themselves off. This is such a common problem that I see with women is we're so busy taking care of everybody else that, you know, we neglect ourselves, right? I like to I'm shifting metaphors a little bit here. I like to think of it in this way. Imagine that you are a pitcher and, we'll fill you up with we'll call it time. Okay. You have so much time, right? So you're topped off when the pitcher's full, and everybody around you is an empty glass, and they all want your time, right? And some of them are tall, skinny glasses, some of them are short, squatty glasses, and all different shapes and colors and sizes, right? And how do you determine who to pour yourself out to? And you know what how much of your time goes to this glass versus that one, right? Well, often what happens is the loudest and most demanding ones are the ones that get all our time and energy. Would you agree? This is definitely true, in a lot of the people that I work with, it's true in their lives. But what happens over time when your pitcher runs empty? In other words, you are depleted, you are exhausted, you're feeling burnt out, you're feeling overwhelmed, you're feeling stressed, right? All indicators that you yourself you're over what's the word I'm looking for? You're I can't think of the word. You're doing too much for too many people, right? There's a word for that, but I can't think of it in this moment. Okay, well, that's because you haven't prioritized your relationships. So going back to the pyramid, the very first relationship that needs to be at the top of that pyramid, any guesses? Any thoughts? It's God, right? If you don't prioritize your time with God daily, right? Daily listening to his word or reading his word, prayer, talking with God, thinking about God. I know people I, I I strive to be this, but there's some people who naturally are really good at just sort of talking with God all day long, all through their day. Um, I've got little notes, like I got one right down here below my computer. It says pray. I've got little notes that help visually remind me, Debbie, talk to God, right? Because he's got to be at the top of my pyramid. He's got to be the one that I keep at, first and foremost. If I don't do that, every other relationship I have is impacted by that in a not so great way. So who's next on the pyramid? Well, it's you. Now, what do I mean when I say that? I do not mean that you are the most important person after God in your life. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that you are responsible for your mental and emotional and spiritual and physical, all four pillars, well being, right? It's not anybody else's job to take care of you, it's your job. And if you don't prioritize you in that way, then again, all the relationships below that in the pyramid, they suffer. Your marriage suffers, your children suffer, etc. Okay. So now a lot of times, society talks about self-care from this really sort of self-indulgent place. Maybe we'll do another episode on this at a different time, but I'm not talking about self-indulgence. I'm not talking about checking out of your everyday life and, saying, "I don't wanna have to do that because I don't feel like it right now." And then I gotta go have me time. I'm talking about self-parenting. I'm talking about showing up and doing the hard things for yourself that you don't always want to do because it's better for you in the long run, and therefore it's better for everybody else. So that might be going to work on time, going to work when you don't feel like it, going to the gym when you don't feel like it, eating healthy foods when you'd rather not, et cetera, paying your bills, on time, being responsible, okay? Having integrity, all the core values that, a good Christian woman should have, right? But living them through your personal example, not just the words that come out of your mouth, okay? That's part of self-care. Now, it doesn't mean you can't indulge at times. It doesn't mean you can't go do things that are for you, right? And have me time. Not saying that either. I'm saying that putting yourself right below God is saying, I am responsible for me in order for my other relationships to benefit. Okay, which one is next? Well, if you're married, it's your husband. Or if you're a guy listening to this, it's your wife. And this can sometimes get a little tricky because when women have children, they can often sort of relegate their husband to a lower rung than their children. And that's not what God intended. That's not how it should be. Why is that? Because your marriage is the foundation of your home. When the foundation gets cracks in it, the home, the building that you have built on that, it becomes unstable. The marriage has to be attended to. Your husband came before your children. Now, if you are remarried and you have children and they are not your partner's children, so you're a blended family, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. The same principle applies. I'm not saying neglect your children. I'm not saying abdicate your parenting responsibilities to your children. I'm saying that you have to be very, very intentional about prioritizing time with your partner above and beyond your parenting duties. I once had a friend, she and her husband, when they were raising their children, would send them to bed early every night. Like, the kids would complain, "I don't wanna go to bed at 8 o'clock," but they made it very clear to their children, "This is mommy and daddy time. You don't have to sleep, but you gotta be in your rooms. You can read books, you can watch whatever on your tablet." I mean, they had their own sort of ground rules about that, but they made it very clear to their children that that was mom and dad time because they worked and didn't have other, really good connection time, and it wasn't for the family. But how many times in your relationship do you find yourself putting your partner in the back seat and the kids are the glasses in that picture glass metaphor that, especially when they're young, they have so many needs and they're so dependent on you and they're always underfoot and that stage of life can be very exhausting and very draining of energy. So you have to be really intentional about carving out time for each other, finding a good babysitter, whether that's a family member or, somebody else, doing those date nights, even if they're not weekly, bi monthly, twice a month, whatever you can do, finding connection time apart from just, with your husband, apart from just focusing on your kids. Really, really key. Your kids come next, okay? Or and we're not breaking each kid out like, "Well, I really like this one better, so they get a higher rung than this one." No, 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 I'm not saying that. Your kids go on one rung, right? The reality is sometimes we do have favorites, but we try to not have favoritism, but, sometimes that's just real life. But your kids go on one rung, okay? And I don't have that one sort of comes naturally to us as women. I don't have to say to any woman, at least the women I work with, you really need to devote more time towards your children because you're really neglectful of them. You're giving your husband way too much time, right? Usually that is not an issue. Now, it can be for some women who are very career focused. Um, Nothing wrong with being career focused. I have a career. Um, I also didn't have the benefit of raising children, but I got to work with hundreds and hundreds of children in my career. So I feel like God really sort of not made up for it. Not like he has to make up for anything, not saying that, but God blessed me with the opportunity to be able to make a difference in children's lives. That's sort of a squirrel moment there, but those of us who are career women can sometimes be very invested and, committed to work, and our kids maybe don't get the best of us, and that can be a challenge, right? You know, my generation growing up, we're known as the latchkey kids, the Gen Xers, and I was a latchkey kid. My dad was a teacher, my mom was a teacher. She was a stay-at-home mom when I was in elementary school, but what I remember most about my childhood was when my mom went back to work full-time teaching, and I carried a key on a chain, or a string, or, whatever it was, around my neck, and I literally and my sisters and I, we walked home from school, and we were home from school probably for about an hour or so before my dad. He would always get home before my mom because my mom really was a career woman. My dad worked to live. He didn't live to work, which I think he was very balanced about. But my dad would get home about 45 minutes to an hour after we got let out of school. And so we were that generation. We were the latchkey kids. And that's what happens when both people are working outside of the home and kids are now in daycare. Kids aren't coming home on their own. Kids have access to screen time that parents aren't able to monitor. They have access to food in the pantry, in the fridge that can't be monitored, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many things about that, right? Again, I'm not saying don't be a career woman. I'm saying that you have to be very, very intentional about how you prioritize your kids and what they need from you as a mom or as a dad for that matter before work because your kids come before your job. Now, for a lot of us on the pyramid, work comes next. You can these can I'd say once you've got God and you and your spouse and your kids, you can decide after that what you want to come next. But for those of us who need to make a living and or love, having a career and doing what we do, um, often work does come next. But what else goes on the pyramid? Church might go on the pyramid. Certainly, extended family goes on the pyramid. Friends go on the pyramid. If you're very involved in your community, they go on the pyramid, and so on and so forth. And again, you're prioritizing them because you have to be very intentional about the time that you have. You've only got so much in that pitcher, right? And you're pouring yourself up first and foremost to the people that are the most important to you, okay? Now, the reason I use the pyramid, okay, the reason I like that metaphor is that the lines that delineate each of those sections of the pyramid, those are your boundaries. A solid line means an intact boundary. It means that you know how to say no without feeling guilty. You know how to compartmentalize, or maybe that's not the right word, but you know how to say, I only have so much time to give you because I have higher priority relationships in my life that need to be attended to. And and that's what keeps the pyramid in its shape, right? If the solid line becomes a dotted line, now we've got very permeable boundaries, right? There's a little bit of leakage, right? Things are blending over and affecting, like my time with God, I might be letting, other things creep into that, which I can be very guilty of. I can let work creep into the time with God and so on and so forth. That's an indication to me that that's a permeable boundary and I need to do something to shore it up. Now, remove the line altogether. What happens? The pyramid collapses. It becomes a flat line. And now we're back to that metaphor of the people who are the loudest, that are screaming the most for your time and energy. They're the ones who are getting it. The quiet ones, the ones who aren't calling out to you and saying, I need you, th- they, they, They still want you to show up, okay? God's not out there going, "Debbie, Debbie, where are you? You haven't talked to me today," right? That's not happening. But does God still want me to show up? Absolutely, he does. So he's off here quiet in the background. Maybe every once in a while, I'll get that little voice in my head that says, "Debbie, you haven't whatever, you haven't prayed today, you haven't studied today, you really haven't spent any time with God today." But he's not the loud one over here. That's work. That's whatever. Usually for me, it's work. It's not even my husband. My husband is quite quiet and content in the background. And, you know, because of his own background, I think he thinks crumbs of my time are better than no time at all, which I'm not okay with, and he shouldn't be okay with either. But if that's all you've ever been used to, then you settle for that, right? Okay, so do you have a flat line or do you have a pyramid? Do you have solid boundaries? Do you know who's first? Do you live that? Or do you just talk a good talk? Sometimes I just talk a good talk and then I have to like slap myself on the head and go, Debbie, what are you doing? You got to get back to what you know is right. So I want you to really think about this whole pyramid of relationship thing because when you live that, when you prioritize the relationships that are the most important to you, your whole life changes for the better. It's amazing to see what happens when you get that right and when you recognize I don't have so much time and energy to give, so I want it to go in the right ways, in the right places, to the right people. That's it for today's episode. Thanks as always for joining me. Share this. Send this to somebody that you know will benefit from listening to this. And, please subscribe so that you are alerted to future episodes as well. And as always, if you're struggling, reach out to me, debbiecaudle.com. Come check out my free resources. Go check out my private Facebook group, Relationship Resolution. And um, if you're ready, if you're really ready to do the work, if you're really ready to make some changes in your marriage, give me a call. I'll see you on next week's episode.